Hey, so today I'm going to show you how to drive your animations in TouchDesigner that normally use time. So here's a quick example. So I'll start off by just deleting everything. And the first thing that we're going to need is our audio. So let's go ahead and place an audio file in. I'm just going to search for the existing one that I had. And then to hear our audio, if I right click here, I'll attach an audio device out. Now we can hear it. And the one thing I want to do as well is it normally plays sequentially, but sometimes it's nice to lock it to the timeline so that way I can use the timeline here to kind of scrub around to different sections. And I've changed the start time of it just so that it's at a location where I have the actual beat come in. And you can modify the start and end time right here. So I just changed this value from 0 to a new value. So the next thing that we're going to want is our audio analysis. So we're going to go ahead and open up the palette. And if you already have experience doing audio analysis, you can do your own kick or snare detection, but for now we're going to use TouchDesigner's built-in tool. So scroll down to the folder that says Tools, and we'll drop in this audio analysis component right here. Go ahead and drag a wire between these two, and then we're going to place a null so we can see the values that are coming out of it. So I'll right click here, place a null, and let's go ahead and play the song for a second. And we want to look in this section. So this is our snare and kick. We basically just want those default parameters out of it. So let's go ahead and grab those. We can use a select. And let's get our kick detection. So delete the star and you can type in a matching name. So that grabs kick detection. And if you put a space, we can select another channel as well. So we'll do snare. And let's go ahead and rename it as well. So we're going to call this kick count and snare count. And another thing that we want to do as well is combine them together. So we'll want to be able to count up our kick, snare, and then both of those combined. So let's go ahead and place a math. And what we'll do is combine the channels right here, and we're just going to add them together. And then what we can do is rename this one. And we're going to call this kick, snare, count. And let's combine it back into a single chop. So we'll place a merge. And we'll connect both of them. Okay, so they're all doing the same thing right now, but they're not actually counting. So let's go ahead and start to count up any time that these are triggered. So to do that, we can actually just use TouchDesigner's built-in count component. So now this is going to start incrementing, and we can go ahead and play this for a second. So you'll notice as well that it's counting up too often, and that's because we need to actually fine-tune our audio analysis. So what we can do for that is I'll go ahead and click on the audio analysis and have that open and with my parameters, and I'm going to look at this. And what I want to do is change the threshold for the kick and the snare so that we only get a kick count when a single kick happens. We don't want multiple. And similarly, if the kick happens and it doesn't trigger, then we've kind of adjusted the threshold too much. So I'm going to go ahead and change the range of these two and just make sure that these are counting up correctly. That looks pretty good. All right, so the last thing that we want to do is take these and add a lag to them so that they actually will interpolate between their positions. And so what we can do is add a lag. There we go. And in the lag component here, this first parameter handles sort of the attack, like how much lag should there be when it initially triggers. So let's go ahead and add a fair amount to this. And then how about when, like after it triggers, how much should it trail? So we're going to keep both of those fairly high, and these can be things that you can adjust and kind of based off of your visuals as well. Okay, so the last thing that we want to do is just take this and then combine it with the original parameters. So we can kind of let's turn this into a kind of a standalone component. So what we'll do is merge these values with the original ones, which you can see over here in this null. So we'll drag maybe I'll lift this up a little bit. We'll drag a wire between these. And that is it so far. So we have our audio analysis prepped, and let's turn this into a component. So I'm just gonna snag from here in the audio analysis all the way over, and I'm gonna right click off of a component. Make sure you're not hovered over an actual operator. I'm gonna select in the background and then click collapse selected. And this will turn it into a component. And let's name this audio analysis time. And you'll notice there's no output for it right now. So let's go ahead and go inside. And what we'll do is just attach an out. And if we zoom out, you'll see we have our output now. All right, so we've got our audio analysis prepped. Now let's place a null afterwards so we can just see everything. And this is great. If you want to save this, one thing that you can do is place this in your palette so you can reuse it for later. I would recommend going back into the palette, and then if you drop down My Components, if you don't have a folder here already, what you can do is right-click and do Add Folder, give it a name. So in this case, I have one called Audio. I'm going to take this component, drag it on, and now I can reuse this for later. Okay, so the next part is actually rendering some graphics. And then what we can do later on is pass this kick and snare count and all that good stuff to drive those animations. So let's go ahead and start with the noise. So if we go into tops, we search for noise. One of the first things that I want to do is actually match the resolution of this to my project. So if I go into the common tab at the top, and then I change this to parent panel size, we're now matching the resolution of our parent container. And the reason that I do this, so if I scroll all the way out to the project, it allows me to change my resolution right here, and it'll automatically update the resolution of this child component. It's a great way to make sure that your project can kind of scale to different resolutions. The other thing I want to do is set this to 32-bit float RGBA. And now what I want to do is just kind of customize the look and feel of it. So for noise, this is great at just kind of randomly generating some things that look random, but have kind of smooth continuation between them. And what I want to do here is to kind of make it look a little bit smoother and less grainy. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and take the harmonics and turn it down a little bit. So we were doing one less sample. The harmonics are going to do add multiple samples of noise on top of it. So I'm just going to put it at one harmonic. And then we'll take the spread, and I'm going to go ahead and put this at around 1.33. And then let's go ahead and take our amplitude and increase it to around, let's bring this up. Let's put this at 2, and then bring the offset down to 0. Okay, this is looking good. And then what we want to do, let's go ahead and duplicate this. And I want a version of this. This is kind of like very soft shapes. I want a version of this that's going to be a little bit grainier, grittier. And we're going to use this, we're going to fade this version of it in when the snare hits. One thing that I really like to do is drive my visuals kind of like large motion with the kick, and then bring in some type of visual clarity or add some type of detail whenever the snare comes in. This has been really helpful for some of my personal visuals in the past. So what we'll do here is take the noise component, and let's go ahead and bump up the harmonics. So now we're adding in 2 more samples of noise. And what's great is it's going to keep roughly the same shape, and we can kind of fade between those. And then let's bump the spread up as well. I'm going to bring this up to let's say 4. And then the harmonic gain, I'm going to drop it down to kind of keep some of the contrast of that original shape. So let's do 0.3. And then similarly, let's go ahead, let's keep the offset and the amplitude at a similar place. For starters, let's just drive these both. Let's just drive these animations so you can kind of get a sense of how to do that. We'll go into the transform and actually select both of them. And here, what we want to do is pass a reference to our kick snare count. So we want to drive the motion of it when both the kick and the snare happens. So to do that, we'll go ahead and go to this null, hit the plus button here to put it in an active mode, and then we're going to drag the kick snare count onto this translate Z and pass it as a reference. So now when I hit play, you'll notice that the animation's driven with audio. We also might want to scale that back a little bit. So one thing I'll do to just quickly change that is I'll insert between these two a math. And what I'll do is take all those values, or actually, you know what, a better way to do this, let's just change it individually. In this expression here, I'm going to take the kick snare count and I'm just going to multiply it by 0.3, just to kind of like scale down the amount of motion. So now if I hit play, it's just a bit slower. The other thing that can be really nice here as well is to actually have our animations just move with time as well, so that we get some motion even while our audio isn't playing, or even when the kick or snare isn't being triggered. So to do that, we'll type in a little Python expression that is abs time.seconds, and let's scale it way down. So we'll do like by times 0.05, and now we're going to get a little bit of motion even when there's no kick and snare happening. Okay, this is looking good. Okay, so now we want to blend between these two. So we can use a switch component. And what's great about this is that the switch normally can just be a way of transitioning between two different tops. So you can see if I go from 0 to 1, it'll just switch. And for example, if I were to put another one in, we're just going to duplicate this just to show you. Once I go to the next one, it'll transition to the next component. So what we want to do is just smoothly blend between them. And what we can do here is just turn on blend between inputs, and now we'll get a seamless transition. And let's have this happen whenever there is a snare. So we'll actually use our original snare detection here. So if I take snare detection, pass this in, and pass it by reference. So it's a little bit too slow right now. And I think one reason why is that we might want to actually make sure that the lag is also applied to our other parameters. So let's do that actually. I'm going to modify this real quick. Here you were seeing that our lag was only happening on the kick, snare, and kick, snare count. We're actually going to put it after this merge. So let's go ahead and disconnect this and disconnect this, and go ahead and merge from this count into this merge too. So we're going to connect the lag in between these, in between your merge and your output. All right, so now when we hit play, you'll notice that the lag is being applied to the value, but what we really want is to scale this up so that we can actually see this happening on a larger scale. So we're going to multiply our index by around like 30. Let's try 30. Nice, that looks good. Okay, so what next? Let's add in some color. So similarly, what we can do here is we can actually use a noise component to randomly generate some color. So we'll drop a noise down, and what we can do here is pass in our previous noise as input. And let's go into the common. We'll do parent panel size and 32-bit float. And then what we actually want to do here is turn off monochrome. And what that'll do is generate color on top of it. And the other thing that's nice is like right now there's a lot of color, so I kind of want to zoom in on the noise. So you notice that if I increase the period, it's kind of like zooming in on it. So we'll put this at about 30 so we can get a couple core colors. And then let's take the harmonics. Actually, let's take the spread and let's bring this down a fair amount. So let's do like 0.1 and then set the harmonic gain. Oh, that's pretty good actually. Similarly, let's put the offset at 0, and then we can kind of play around with the amplitude a little bit. There we go. Okay, so what's great is that we can also drive this transition with the color similarly. So let's actually take the same expression that we passed into this noise, and we'll place this into the transform of our color noise. So now we'll be able to transition that. The one thing I'm going to do here as well is connect this to an out. So that way we can just, I'm going to put it far off to the side so that we can see it. And I'm going to click the blue dot here so that we can see a live preview in the background. And let's go ahead and see what it looks like. Okay, so the last thing that we want to do to get kind of these rings and ripple effect is to use a displace. So normally the way that displace works is by taking an input image and then taking a second image that is a color value, and it's the amount that you want to displace it by. So I can show you a quick example of that. If I place down a circle and we pass that in, and then if I place a constant, and what we'll do is take the constant and we'll drop the alpha down to 0.5. What we can do is, if we look at the displace, you'll see that we're using the red and the blue channel to displace the image. So notice if we go into the constant now, and if we increase the red channel, it moves it to the left. If we decrease it, so if we do like 0.9, it'll move it to the right. If we go to the blue channel, increase that, it'll change the Y direction. If we change it to a smaller value, it moves up. And one thing that's interesting about this is we can actually use a base image and we can displace it by itself, and we get a really cool effect out of that. This looks a little too intense right now, so what we're going to do is take the displace weight and we're going to change it to like 0.1 and 0.1, and that will give us a much better look. There we go. One last thing that I wanted to show you right before we go is another really cool effect you can layer on top of this. I'll show it to you right now. It's kind of a watercolor effect. This is using a technique called double feedback loops. It's basically two feedback loops that feed back into one another. I'm not going to go into specifically how to create this effect. Marcus Heckman created a really great tutorial on this that I'll link to in the description, but I basically took it and turned it into a component that I will also put in the description that you can download. All that you need to do to create this is just use another noise function, use this component, and then we just transition between our original visualization that we created and the new one using a switch, the same way that we transition between our two noise components. So I'm going to show you how to set that up really quickly. Go back to its original state. We were here. And let's create this effect. So I'm going to drag this component in from my palette. I'll include it as a TOX file, so you should be able to just download it and then drag it into your TouchDesigner project. And what we'll do is I wanted this to look very soft when no kick or snare is happening. And so to get this watercolor effect, I actually took before the displace, I took this color noise and I passed this into the double feedback as input. So the first parameter is input. The second parameter is how to drive the displacement of the image. So I'm going to place a null right after so we can kind of see things. And you'll notice that it's not positioned right. So what we need to do is place a noise down, and we'll go ahead and link this up. It's going to be very chaotic, but we need to tweak it to make sure that it's kind of in a good setting. So we'll go ahead and go to the common, we'll do parent panel size, we'll set it to 32-bit float, and then we'll also turn off monochrome so that it's color. We need to scale down the amplitude so it's a smaller effect. And then I'm going to go ahead and just change a couple parameters here so that we get a nice sort of soft aesthetic. You'll see that it's already displacing a little bit. And what we want to do here is, just kind of tone it back a little bit. So I'll take this and we're going to go ahead and put the period to 2, take the harmonics, keep that the same. Let's bring up the harmonic spread to around like 4.5, bring the gain down to 0.35, and let's bring the exponent up a little bit to like 1 point. I'll show you how to play around with this parameter. So you'll notice that it's kind of in a fixed position, and that is because we're not actually animating this noise component. So what we can do is use the same expression that we used in the transform of our original noise. We'll just copy this and we'll paste it into this noise component as well. And now we get some really cool effects. And what I'll do is insert a switch so we can transition between, put a switch so we can transition between these two. And similarly, we'll toggle blend between inputs, and I'll drag this on. And by default, we actually want this playing. So we'll switch the order of our inputs. We want this null on top. And what I wanted to show you is that right now it kind of looks like there's a lot of individual pixels in it. So if we go to the noise component and take the exponent and increase this a bit, we'll get a lot softer shapes. If we bring this up to about like 1.7, and this is a really fun one to play around with. Because if you bring the exponent up high enough, it becomes our original input. So somewhere in between is nice. Let's do like 1.7. So now this displacement is being triggered by some of our kick and snare. What we want to do is transition these visuals back to our original image here when the snare drum happens again. So let's go ahead and we'll just take the same expression that's in this switch and we'll copy it and we'll put it into this switch component over here. And that's it. Awesome. Hope you enjoyed.